I'm just not pleased with so many things. My lack of preparation. I'm not feeling what's going on in my hair right now.
It
I
looks
don't
clean
like
at least. It looks washed.
I don't think
No.
I've washed it in a day or two.
Well, then I guess it's just
It
dirty.
was smushed under the hat. Um, and I
Okay,
don't
well
love
here,
this backdrop
no,
of this
listen,
hotel,
you're
of
in
this
a
4 points.
hotel.
Yeah.
Not everyone has beautiful wallpaper all the time, and that's not your
Yeah,
fault.
that's really nice.
I know. It is
I
very
like it a
nice.
lot.
All right, guys, we're here on Oral Sessions. I am joined again. I believe this is my only repeat customer in Sami Zayn.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay. That's a distinction of some kind.
it is. It absolutely is. But here's the cool thing. Okay, so I was on maternity leave, but I'm back because I've had my baby. It's been 6 weeks. I only gave myself 6 weeks. So as I was doing all of these maternity episodes
Very,
and having
very
all these,
American of you, might I say.
a very
Six
American of
weeks,
me.
get back to work.
I know. Though I will say, I mean, I will give like a little asterisk next to that is like, okay, I need like a couple hours a week where I just go into this other room in my house. It's not like I have to really go
No,
anywhere.
no.
I mean, there's more prep that goes into it. I will
Sure.
say there's more work than just hopping on and pressing the button and pressing record. Anyways,
I have found that out
it's a
because
lot
you're
of
asking
work.
me to help you kind of guest host this thing, right? And
Yes.
I was like, I should. There's preparation to this. What am I
Which you
going to
didn't
do?
do.
Which
But
I
you
didn't
didn't
do. Which is very, very me. And
Very
maybe I'll elaborate on that a little bit. When we really get going.
Okay. So I had the guest host. Of course, talking to Sami Zayn, he was one of the first people that I was like, oh my God, I would love to have him come on and be a guest host. But in classic Sami Zayn fashion, it took a little while to get the ball rolling on that, to really hammer him down, to get this locked in. So I'm back from maternity leave. So we're kind of doing this together, but the ball's definitely more in your court. This is still your episode of the show. And I'm just here to serve as some sort of conduit to whatever we decide to talk about. But you said you've not prepared, so that actually is fun for me. I like where this is headed.
I've never prepared for a podcast because I'm the interviewee, right?
Yes.
So I just figure, okay, you ask me stuff, we'll talk, we'll talk, and we'll see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But then, so first of all, when you asked me, I don't even know when you asked me. It must have been 4 or 5 months ago. It was well before you had given birth, because you were saying, hey, once I give birth, I'm going to take some time off and I'm going to have a few guests. Do you want to do it? And I was ecstatic. I thought, oh my God, how fun how fun would that be? And then when I thought about that a little bit, I was like, what's that all about?
What is it about?
Why, like, what kind of ego do I have that I'm like, oh yeah, I get to talk about whatever I want. Everyone's going to listen to me just rambling about whatever I want. Yeah.
You got your soapbox. You can do it.
Narcissism. Right. But I mean, if you pick that apart for even just a few seconds, you're like, what is that all about? And that's a big thing. And that's actually what I was kind of wanted this whole podcast to be about, which is when you unpack anything for even more than a few seconds and you start asking, what's that about? Things get real interesting.
Sure. It's funny. I mean, okay, so this might take us off in like a different tangent, but because I'm in baby mode right now and had a baby, went through all that. As I was preparing to wrap my head around the idea of having a child, I took that back to being like, wait, am I just being like a narcissist that I feel the need to have a replication of myself?
I don't
try
think
to
so,
have a baby.
That wasn't your intention, because we talked about this long before you ever got pregnant. Your intention was never, you know what I really need?
Another me.
Yeah, you never. That wasn't it. In
also,
fact,
let me make it very.
It was true. You were more about, I want to care about someone and something else more than I care about me and my wardrobe. I have so many clothes.
I do have great wardrobe though.
No, your wardrobe's actually ridiculous.
I think
the amount of clothes
that I cut my shirt though.
No, I'm not. I love it, and I appreciate it that you've fashioned it in your own style. But all I'm getting at is it was the very, very opposite of that. It wasn't narcissistic. You wanted to care for something, be about something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I was over myself. I'm over myself. The spotlight is on somebody else. Though I will just add this one note is that my baby is Jon. So she's Jon through and through.
What do you mean? Yeah,
She
personality wise.
looks like Jon. Well, personality wise, a little hard to tell. She's a little feisty, so she's got that for me for sure. But she looks like Jon.
So,
Which
you
is
know what
very
I
funny.
heard not long ago, and I don't know, this might be speculative, but apparently it's like a biological evolutionary type thing that babies early on look more like the dad because I mean, think about everything we know now that we take as a given.
Okay.
As this is how babies are made, and it's one sperm cell and one egg cell, and they have two combined, and you have genetics and DNA. This is extremely, extremely new information in the
Yeah, it's
scope
high
of
tech.
human history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking nothing. It's so new.
Yeah.
Even the idea that it's one father is kind of, I mean, we take that as a given.
Sure.
But I think I heard something that I don't remember. I'm going to say ancient tribes, but I don't remember where this is deriving from. But they believed like many men would have intercourse with the woman because they believed that like you're making a cocktail and you're getting the best of all these men.
I'd call that a cocktail.
This one super baby.
Yeah.
Right. And when you think about that, if you didn't know what we know now as a given of genetics and one cell and one egg and all this, you'd be like, hey, you know what would make great babies? We take the strongest guy, the fastest guy, the tallest guy, and we get them all together and they all do their thing with the woman and then she'll have a super baby. I mean, that's kind of like a natural way to think if you didn't know what we already know.
You'd want to weed out the weak links.
Well, I'm not sure you'd want to. I'm just saying I'm just trying to highlight how we take this thing as common knowledge and we take it like, of course, it's just always how it is, but it's not. And you used to, maybe women had intercourse with more than one man. So you didn't know who the father was. You didn't know who the father was. So that is why apparently evolutionarily, the baby early on looks like the father, so you could tell who the father is.
Wow.
Right? Isn't that kind of nuts? And I don't know. I don't even know where I got this information, but I just thought
I like that theory.
Isn't that cool?
That's really funny. That's very interesting. Because I mean, a lot of times when you look at a baby, it's kind of hard to tell. But I will say, as soon as this baby was cut from my womb, the doctor looked at Jon and was like, "Here's your baby, sir. This is your kid."
How insulting after the labor you're going through,
no,
the pain.
Like, what the hell? I did everything.
No, that is total patriarchal BS is what that is. Like you're there bleeding. He won't even look at you in the eye. He's like, sir, come on, probably lighting a cigar, Sorry, come over here.
He's ashing it over me. Yeah.
Ashing it over your wounds.
That'll seal that up nicely.
Yeah. Who's this doctor?
Oh my God. No, she's actually a woman and she's pretty cool. But it was just because the baby looked so much like Jon when she came out that she was like, here's your paternity test. But
I'm out for revenge. Who is this doctor?
Okay. So, I mean, we came on here and we didn't really have a plan of what we wanted to talk about, but there was some wrestling stuff that you wanted to talk about, right? Is this true?
Well,
we were going to do a little dissection into some wrestling things or no?
What we're kind of talking about now was almost the idea I had for the podcast, which is just, hey, here are things we take as givens, not just about, life, but wrestling, because everyone who's listening to this is probably a wrestling fan. That's how they know you. I'm sure you've attracted a few scragglers from other avenues or whatever, but your notoriety is from the wrestling world. So I'm assuming that a large part of your fan base is are wrestling fans. And
we
so
all love wrestling. Everything is wrestling.
And you know what? Wrestling's fascinating. So even if you're not a wrestling fan, I thought it would be really interesting to look at wrestling as this thing that we have this general understanding of what it is, or we kind of take it at face value for what it is. But then when you start to think about it for even a minute and start to dissect things like, hey, why does it work this way? Or what are these storylines about? Or what influences this? Just why is it this way? Then I think it gets really, really interesting because, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. But again, I didn't do my homework well enough. So I have these.
So we're just spitballing here.
No, I mean, look, I have my views on things, but it's also a reflection of how I feel about other things in the world. And wrestling is just an easy way to point to it because wrestling has sort of been my thing, like constant in my life, where I could
Yeah.
see, these things that I think about in society and the world, they're also reflected in wrestling. You know what I mean? And just drawing those parallels between these really between the humanities and wrestling, and how wrestling uses the humanities, you know, like psychology and sociological norms and things like that, and wrestling plays on all of those. So you have to have an implicit understanding of that stuff in order to do wrestling well. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I just I'm fascinated by the humanities and by the social sciences, and I just thought wrestling, my God, it's such a reflection of so many of these things. And that's a lot of what I wanted to kind of do, is just think about some of these things that we see in wrestling a lot and go, where do you think that comes from? Or what's that about?
Sure.
Or what does this say about our society? You know, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's that like phrase of like everything is wrestling. I mean, so many things can either be reflected in wrestling or stem from wrestling. I mean, even you touching on like the psychology of the way that wrestling kind of comes together, it always blew my mind how much there was to know about wrestling. Like
Mm-hmm.
the psychology behind things, the why things work, why things don't work. And this is not like you can't just take like a crash course and try to figure that out. It takes years and years and years to really kind of figure out why things work and don't work. And you're constantly having to learn and evolve and like keep your finger on the pulse to figure
Yeah.
shit out.
And the funny thing is, in wrestling, even a somewhat casual fan will have heard the word psychology in wrestling, but we never seem to connect the very obvious dots of psychology in wrestling and psychology, the actual scientific discipline, right?
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's not wrestling psychology and psychology. It's just psychology.
Yeah.
and it's, how does wrestling prey on what we know about people and the human condition, and how do we manipulate that? You know, you have to have a basic understanding. Actually, I'd say more than basic, a somewhat complex understanding of the human condition in order to manipulate the human condition.
And
You know what I'm saying?
how much harder has that gotten over the years in terms of like fans awareness, how much knowledge is out there for people to know as humans are changing, and like our wants and needs are changing, people's attention spans are constantly changing. Like that, does that make putting together wrestling shows and matches more difficult to evolve from what wrestling matches used to be?
I'm sure in some ways, but I'm still talking about just the nuts and bolts. You know, I'm just talking about what is wrestling, and the idea of like a good guy and a bad guy, and here's things that we say are wrong, and here's things or that are right, and here's things that make someone virtuous, and here's things that make somebody dastardly, and here are the sort of parameters and the meaning that we ascribe to things, because it's all made up.
Sure.
Right? It's all made up.
Yeah.
And that's part of the beautiful reflective nature of wrestling, is that it's not just wrestling that's all made up. It's all of it. It's all made up. You know, our social. I
feel like this is like rules. we need like Daniel Bryan on this podcast, or like Brian Kendrick. I feel like it's like
this is what I'm saying about just thinking about something for more than 10 seconds. If you take it at more than face value, like our society, these very complex things, and you start to kind of go, what's that about? Like, oh, it's all just kind of made up, right?
Yeah.
It's all like our taboos evolve with time. There are things that are taboo now that won't be taboo in 20 years, or things that were very taboo 20 years ago that are out in the open now.
What are some like examples of those like taboo things?
I don't know, just off the top of my head, let's say homosexuality.
Okay.
Right. Has changed the way we as a society look at homosexuality now versus 40 years ago.
Sure.
You know, that's just off the top of my head.
As humans
but
evolving.
Certainly out in the open and in the world of sports or whatever, you know, it's always been prevalent. But I'm just saying, it's everything's viewed differently, and everything's constantly changing. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, because things are constantly changing, you start to realize that this stuff's all kind of made up and I don't want to say arbitrary because there are obvious reasons why everything ends up the way it is. That's one of the things I was going to discuss is like that everything is the way it is for a reason. I think that's part of a whole bigger thing that I want to unpack. But all this to say, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay because I'm a little lost too. Okay.
What was the last thing we were saying?
Just how everything is made up and there's these arbitrary things and we're
right. And wrestling is a great example of that, right? Because I could say, hey, this matters. And we set the parameters. So if we can do that, then you start to realize that, oh, wait, that's kind of how society works is these parameters are set and we're all operating within a very specific framework that are just like, I don't want to say arbitrary. It's not the right word, but they're fictive and they're man-made and we choose them and the goalposts move over time. Right. Sure. And that kind of makes you realize, and I think I think part of what's colored my perception of this kind of stuff is that if I go back to my upbringing from a very young age, being Arab and Muslim and being brought up in an extremely Arab, extremely Muslim household, and then also being this white looking redheaded kid, for all intents and purposes, just raised in the Western world and kind of adopting to these two totally different sets of values and norms and different taboos and different things makes you aware very early on, not on a conscious level that you could articulate because you're not there yet, but you have this sort of implicit understanding that, oh, certain people do things this way, and then other people in other places in the world do things that way.
Yeah.
So when you already start to kind of understand that, again, not in a way that you're able to articulate in any sort of smart way when you're 7, but you already have this sort of implicit understanding of it, then you kind of start to see that nothing is necessarily set in stone, that there aren't these hard truths about the way what is right and what is wrong, because something that was right in, let's say, the Canadian Western society would have been considered wrong in an Arab Islamic society. And I got to kind of dip my toes in both and realize like, oh, it's fine here, but it's not fine here. What's that about? And I think that's the underlying thing of what I wanted to kind of unpack today is just what's that about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay. So, I mean, when you're like applying that to wrestling terms, there's so many different ways that you can look at that of like why certain things work in one promotion or they don't work in another one. Some of like the rules of how someone is, I guess just even like for me entering the wrestling world and learning what some of these like sort of unspoken rules were of like the handshaking and the like, wondering if you can change in the locker room, like some of these things that you're just not really aware of when I didn't come from that world, and trying to figure those things out at a quick pace so that you're not booted out of everything.
Yes. And that's fascinating that you think you understand culture because you're a part of this culture, but then you enter this subculture and you're like, whoa, wait, what? There's this world here and there's an entirely different way of functioning. And when you're an adult and you're entering a new subculture, maybe not everybody, but certainly me and the way my brain works, I kind of look around, I'm like, well, this is all a little silly, isn't it? It's not arbitrary because there are historical reasons for everything and why things end up being the way they are. And, if you have a deeper understanding of the wrestling business and its evolution and how protected it was, you kind of start to understand these things and why things are the way they are. But as let's say an outsider, because you were a wrestling fan, but then you also were a broadcaster, and then eventually
I was definitely not a part of like the world of
the
wrestling.
culture.
Like, I was on the outskirts of it, and then I was submerged in the culture of it.
Yeah.
And quickly, like you've got to have like your eyes and your ears open to be like, wait, how does this work? So that you aren't the person that gets ousted for not knowing what is going on.
And even then, you entered WWE, which is a kind of its own other subculture too.
Sure.
Like it's its own little. There's a culture within that company versus cultures in different companies or on the independents. But all I'm saying is when you're mindful of this stuff and you don't just take it at face value, it's very interesting. And in a way, you kind of have to laugh at it because it's also kind of silly. Some of it's silly.
Well, it's funny because I remember sort of thinking that I thought that it was a bit silly, or like, wait, someone's going to act like you guys are not going to like somebody if they don't do one of these things, or like how that person's perceived. But then after my time being there, if I saw somebody doing one of the things, I'm like, oh my God, this person's doing it. Like you become a little bit more accustomed to how things work when you don't know and you're fully submerged in that world.
And I think that's incredible. Like that, think about that, how quickly you could think about the world. Let's take wrestling out of it now for a sec. Wrestling is the backdrop, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you entered this culture with a way of thinking, but then you kind of get like indoctrinated or assimilated or kind of taught like, no. This is how you think. This is how you behave. This is how you do things around here. And then maybe at first you're like, what? But then you start to kind of adopt it. And then the next thing you know, you become a product of it.
Yes.
But then think about that in wrestling, but think about that also in the scope of the world and politics and insane wars over human history.
Yeah.
And how easy it is to shape the human mind.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
God.
And that's where, again, wrestling is a reflection for a much bigger thing that fascinates me, is like how you can take an ordinary person, fill their head with ideas that are just made up. They're all just ideas. They're not, nothing's tangible, nothing's set in stone. It's all just words in the air. And all of a sudden you can be like, yes, death to that person. You know what I'm saying? It gets extreme.
Yeah.
It gets extreme, and it's all just nothing. It's all just nothing, right? It's all just words and ideas, and it's all just made up. Just like wrestling's all made up, and the culture within wrestling's all kind of made up. And again, there are things that shape it, but still the end result is so fascinating to me.
Because somebody initially made that up, and then people just took it as gospel, and then it just kind of grows and it builds, and that becomes what the culture of that thing is. Yeah, it's fascinating. Oh my God. Like I'm actually kind of glad that my brain doesn't work like that, because that seems exhausting to think of like all of these different.
It's fun too, though.
Yeah.
It's fun. And I think about it sometimes with my phone, which I've sadly become pretty addicted to.
Oh, I would not take you for a phone addicted person.
I wasn't, but the pandemic, I think, really took it up a notch. I was on it a lot more.
What are your what are your daily hours? Do you get like that update through Apple of what your hours are?
I don't, because it scared me. But that's a funny little psychological thing. I didn't want to be confronted with the reality of my own behavior. Right? So there was definitely some denial there, because oh man, I'm going to unpack some real stuff here now. Like, okay. Where do I start? So I had this,
pick at it.
I don't even know if I don't think I'm hosting at this point, right? We're just talking. I don't know what's going on.
We're both. I don't know. I mean, if you want to talk about other things, go for it. I'm just
no, it's not that. It's that part of what was, I don't want to say, I was mindful of it. I was a little stressed about it before I started this, because I was thinking, okay, I thought she wanted, like, I thought I was hosting the show on my own. So I'm like, oh man, I have to just be on a podcast by myself for about an hour. What am I going to talk about? And it was exciting, but also a little worrisome, because, what am I going to talk about for an hour? So I had this, I had two things in my head that are kind of opposite ideas, but that I kind of subscribe to. It's a little bit of a nurture nature conversation. And again, going back to my upbringing, I think this is why I'm fascinated with the idea of nature and nurture. And I've been kind of, I don't want to say obsessed with it, but it's definitely been a recurring theme my entire life. And I remember having conversations about nature and nurture when I was like 11. And now when I think back on it, I'm like, man, who's this 11-year-old talking about the ideas of nature and nurture? I was smart. But then I was like, was I smart? Probably not. But I used to think about these things always. And so the two things that popped out to me, and I'll relate them back to wrestling, because that's the whole point of some of this, is so I was watching this Bob Dylan documentary. Is Martin Scorsese put out a documentary on Netflix a few years ago about Bob Dylan, specifically about a tour he did in the 70s called the Rolling Thunder Revue. And I'm a fan of Bob. I'm a big Bob fan.
You're a Bob guy.
I'm here in Minnesota, his home state, Minneapolis right now. Chad Gable is also a big Bob Dylan fan. We talk about him all
I
the
didn't
time.
know that.
Huge. That's one of our big, what do you want to call it?
Your camaraderie.
Connection points. Yeah. But so I was watching this, and a couple of things jumped out at me about this that I thought were fascinating. And one was at the very beginning. I'm going to paraphrase all this because I don't remember any of it, but I don't remember the specifics. But, I think Scorsese or whoever's directing asks him, what do you remember about the Rolling Thunder Revue? Because it was really an interesting thing. He got all these musicians and all these poets, and he played really small venues. It was a really, really interesting tour, enough to warrant a documentary, apparently. So what do you remember about the Rolling Thunder Revue? And he starts to answer with this like Bob style, sort of philosophical, weird, this wishy-washy sort of answer that you would expect out of a Bob Dylan, a poet type person. And then he cuts himself off. He's like, I'm just saying this nonsense. I don't even remember it. Something along these lines where he starts by giving what my little breakdown of it is. He starts by kind of giving the answer that he thinks he should be giving. And then he cuts himself off. And it's like, you know what? It was just another tour. I don't even remember. I've been on tour nonstop for 40 years. He's not going to remember everything, It might seem iconic to us, but it might just be a drop in the bucket for Bob, who's been on the quote unquote never ending tour. That's what he's known for. He's been on tour forever.
Yeah.
And he kind of doesn't remember it. So I thought that was real interesting in the idea of, that's also kind of Bob-ish, is that antagonistic quality to him, which I find interesting. And the reason I'm bringing up Bob Dylan also in this documentary is he gets asked about something about like the meaning of life or something, or I'm butchering this. I should have watched it. I'm
going to start hitting people with that in this show. What's the meaning of life? I'm going to get more philosophical.
Like just something about what's it all about? Mm-hmm. And he's like, or about finding yourself or something like that. And he has this answer that I found really interesting where he says, life isn't about finding anything. It's about creating. It's about creating yourself and creating things. And I thought that was real interesting because it started bringing up the idea to me about like the authentic self. Mm-hmm. And Bob in particular is a real interesting fella in his evolution of his career. If you look into it, he gets a lot of notoriety in the folk scene in New York. And then he becomes like this voice of the generation with his protest music. And he has this antagonistic sort of quality to him. So he's like, hey, no, that's not me. And he starts doing something completely different. And then in the late 60s, all of a sudden he's putting on a cowboy hat and doing like Nashville blues.
Yeah.
And then he's a born again Christian. So he's just doing all this sort of stuff. And then I was also reading this magazine, which coincidentally enough,
see, there we go. See, you're prepared.
Well, no, but this is a total coincidence. I wasn't prepared, but I happened to have with me.
Handsome man, that Bob Dylan.
Yeah, sure.
Also, Jacob Dylan, very handsome.
Yeah, great singer too. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was reading some interviews with people who knew him early on, and they're talking about how, he would take things and then he would just make them a part of him. And
like chameleon-like.
Really, very chameleon-like. Well, even his name is not Bob Dylan. It's Robert Zimmerman. Mm-hmm. Dylan Thomas is a Welsh poet, and Bob took his name. And then he loved Woody Guthrie, and he just kind of like, that was a big part of him early on. He got to New York and he had all these like, they're lies if you really think about it. He just lied about his background and nobody knew where he was from, and he'd say all these things. And it's just very fascinating to me. Like and one person says he would take. I've never seen anybody take things and make them his own the way Bob Dylan did. And that got me really thinking as it pertains to wrestling. Okay. So all that rant about Bob is just to pertain it back to wrestling, because as a hardened critic now of wrestling, because I've been in it so long, it takes a lot to sort of impress me. I think what really stands out, or what fans really gravitate towards, is the idea of authenticity.
Yes.
Right. So like, if somebody plays their character well enough to where there's believability, all of it, the very nature of wrestling revolves around believability, because we all know it's a show, but we want you to trick us.
You want to believe.
That's the you want to believe.
Yeah.
Big word there, believe. And so I think that's why authenticity is so important in wrestling, because first of all, the work has to be authentic enough to make us forget or to make us believe. But then the characters, you know, we have this innate quality. Maybe it's just me because I'm like snooty and I've been in wrestling so long. You call that wrestling? I don't know what. maybe that's me now. I don't know. But if there's something that I don't find believable in the way somebody's carrying themselves, I'm out. And
that's just in general, not even in wrestling.
Right. So what is it about us, not just as wrestling fans, but about people that need this sort of authenticity, or that, you know what I'm saying, that gravitate towards this authenticity?
I think a lot of it is attraction to confidence, and it takes a lot of confidence to be that authentic person. It totally.
Commitment and belief. Belief is the big word, because I think we don't know what to believe. And especially you're talking about the world we live in now with the internet and misinformation and all these different news sites and all this thing where it's so hard to know what to believe.
Yeah.
I think we have great admiration for people that we think believe. Because like, wow, that guy believes something. Because I don't know what to believe, but that guy, he knows. So you're magnetized. You're drawn to that, you know?
There is like that like charisma that's attached to someone that just seems like they don't need to be seeking out what's right or what's wrong. They've already made their decision, and they're like forging their own path, not having to worry about what everyone else is doing. Because that's all I think most of us want at the end of the day, is to have the confidence to just be our authentic selves. But a lot of us are constantly trying to change to please people.
But here's my counterpoint to that, which is that's part A, and I'm in on a lot of that, right?
Okay.
But here's the Sami split, which is
the old Sami split,
which has ruled over my entire life, is the two sides to both things, and I see the merit of that. But then again, nature, nurture, I don't know. The flip side of that, another kind of paraphrase quote here that I kind of remember in Bret Hart's book, the very beginning of the book. He has a quote in there, again, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, life, as you get older, you find life is less about what you learn and more about what you've known all along. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So that lends itself to the idea that there is this sort of authentic self. Whereas the Bob Dylan example that I'm kind of talking about leads me to kind of think that there is no authentic self. You're just this sort of amalgamation and cocktail of all these, because that's what I think I skew more to that. I don't think there's just you. What are you? What are you? You're not you. You're just this mix of things that have been filled in your head and the product of your environment and all these things, and they shape you. I'm kind of the opinion that maybe there is no authentic self. You know?
Yeah, I get that.
I think it's a little bit of both, the nature nurture conversation. Like, obviously, I think you are born, with, let's say, predispositions or whatever. But ultimately, it's like a bunch of light switches, and even genetics we now know work like this. You're not genetically doomed to have, let's say, breast cancer or something, but you could have a genetic predisposition, and external forces of your environment can turn those light switches on and turn those genetics on. You see what I'm saying? So I think, like everything, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a little bit of both. But ultimately, I think that there is no real authentic self when it comes to, like, certainly when you talk about wrestling, because wrestling is all just marketing yourself to kind of get over and all this stuff. But you have to do it in a way that makes people think that what they're seeing is the real you. But there is no real you. Is there? I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think in those moments that there are, I think that's like a moment by moment kind of thing. And I mean, I don't know how deep into this rabbit hole we want to go, but I think Roman Reigns is a great example of that. I feel like looking at the stuff that he's doing now and how authentic he is, it's connecting with people far more than it was prior.
Okay, but like when I say authentic, I don't mean he authentically like he. It's one thing to believe what you're saying, but I'm getting at who you really are before you even become a wrestler. Okay. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting at like, how is that stuff shaped and formed? It's not authentic in that it's like created in your soul. It's stuff that's been added to you. Like you're this bucket and different people have dropped different drops in there. And then, yeah, the end product is this person. And the better you're able to show this side of yourself, but I'm talking about the things behind that, the things that influence that. I don't think those are necessarily authentic in the sense that they originate from within. I'm saying they originate from without. They come from the outside world and your experiences and things like that, and they shape you.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting
I agree with. Yeah, I
like Roman can act the way he acts because he genuinely is a top guy, and now he's handling himself like the top guy. But he was also put in the position to be a top guy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like this circle. It's this circle that begets itself. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm saying
took me
like
a second to arrive upon. I was like, wait, hold on.
Yeah, I'm maybe not articulating it in the right way. When I'm saying authentic self, I'm not talking about that you believe authentically in what you're doing at any given time. I'm saying if you say, hey, where did that come from?
We're talking about the core bones of somebody, of what they're born with versus the things that
just where did they come from?
Them. Yeah.
Where did you get this attitude? Who taught you this attitude? And all of a sudden you realize it's not mine. It's borrowed. Somebody gave it to me. Or, oh, wait, I stole this. I heard it in a song lyric one time and I thought, wow, that sounds cool. I want to embody that. So then you become that. You become Bob Dylan, right? Like you think Woody Guthrie's so cool that you make up this story about riding the rails all the way to New York City. And you might believe it and you might fool other people, but ultimately you just took something cool and said like, hey, I'll make that a part. That's me now.
Yeah.
That's me now. What is that? What is that? Think about that. That's me now. Isn't that crazy?
You're trying on a different hat and calling it a day and moving on.
That's me now. What a statement.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement when you think about it. That's me. Who is me? It makes you think, right? Then after a little bit more, who is me? What is me? Right?
Yeah. How do you because like you can't peel away those layers anymore. They're pretty cemented on.
But you kind of can. I think you kind of can. And it comes from just asking these little questions like, hey, where did that come from? Where did I learn this? It's unraveling, it's unpacking this stuff. And like I'm saying, a lot of the way I'm thinking in this whole conversation, I've realized over the years, and maybe I'm misidentifying it, but I believe it comes from the sort of dual culture that I was brought up in.
Right.
Right. I think that's kind of the root in some ways for a lot of things and the very nature of this conversation, because I've asked myself, hey, where does it come from? Where does this come from?
Okay, so where would you draw everything back to for yourself for you to decide like, I'm going to be a professional wrestler? That's me now. That's the thing that I want to start doing.
So I don't know. I remember, now you're asking questions nobody knows the answers to, like where at what point in your development does something stick and shape your personality completely? And some things happen later in life, so you're old enough to remember them, but some might happen so young that you'll never be able to identify them. But I remember some of my earliest memories are watching WWF and watching Hulk Hogan with my dad. And I don't know, again, this nature nurture thing, I don't know if I naturally gravitated towards it because of the nature of my personality. Is there a nature to my personality? Maybe not. Maybe at a very, very young age, maybe at 1 or 2, I started getting positive reinforcement for behaving in a certain way. And I have no recollection of it. And that maybe skewed my personality into an entertainer type personality. So when I see Hulk Hogan lighting up my screen, I'm drawn to it. And then in school, I'm not paying attention because I'd much rather, get a pop. And it's so funny because now I'm following the path now, because when I did the New Days podcast, we talked all about how I live for the pop. I live for the pop. And this was me. Okay, so this is a perfect example. I love a good pop. I love to pop the boys. I love popping with the boys. If I see a pop, I want to be in it. I'm just like, I just see guys like the New Day will be laughing, and I just come up like, what are we laughing about? Let me in. Let me in. I want to be part of the pop.
Yeah.
So I love the pop. But now we keep going back and we keep going back. I'm like, wait a minute. This was me when I was 6 or 7. I loved the pop.
Always love the pop.
So the question becomes, was I born loving the pop? or did something happen at a certain point that made me gravitate towards the pop? And it could just be like I did a funny thing when I was 2 and my parents laughed and I loved the feeling of that laughter.
Yeah.
And it shaped my personality, just this never-ending pursuit to make people laugh and make people feel these ways and be part of good times and good energy. So it's a chicken or the egg type thing, or a nature nurture type thing. And that's what I'm trying to pick apart is there, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You kind of get what I'm saying. I don't want to harp on it too much.
No, I do, but it's funny because I'm thinking about that for myself. And, I think I also always lived for the pop and didn't know that was a thing that I loved. I didn't even know what a pop was until, 15 years.
Yeah, but the pop is it's a good time. It's the laughs.
It's a good time. But I remember being very little. And I don't know if it was like that things were tense around my house because my parents were divorcing or separating or whatever, that I would always find light in a situation and be like, oh, I'll say so. Like I used to do.
You remember consciously doing this?
Yes. I used to do a John Wayne impression when I was really little. That was my go-to gag that I would do a John Wayne impression.
You're like, oh man, tough crowd. Better hit him with the John Wayne. Yes. You're such a little performer just from even then.
I don't even know how or why or what, but I did this John Wayne thing, and like that would be like a thing that I would like lean on. Right. But I remember even like I split open my forehead when I was in grade 1, and when I was getting the stitches to I think to alleviate my own stress, I still did the John Wayne impression for the doctors. Wow. Because I just I didn't want it to be like weird that I like split my head open, But anyways, I think that's something that like stems from like wanting to like get like approval or like make things feel okay.
Well, it sounds like a defense mechanism.
It is a defense mechanism.
Right. Absolutely. It's like, oh man, this is real. Here's some laughter to deflect.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So this turned into a therapy session out of the blue. but all I'm getting at, so it's great that we're doing this on our own, you and I right now, apparently, or, reliving our childhood experiences and trying to get to the root of some of this stuff. And all I'm saying, and maybe this took a weird right turn or maybe a left turn, but I was the idea behind the idea of hosting this podcast was to kind of do this about wrestling. Instead, we ended up doing it about ourselves, but that's fine. But
well, we can only really truly use ourselves as subjects when you're really dissecting stuff that far down, right? Is that true?
Maybe.
I don't know.
I mean, no, but yourself is a great place to start, because once you have a better understanding of yourself, then it's easier to see it around you. You know what I mean? Like, goodness, I listened to this podcast that was really interesting once. It's what was her name? Carol Tavers or something like that. It was a podcast by a guy named Sean Carroll called Mindscape. Very sciencey. And the very first episode he did was with this doctor lady, and she talks about cognitive dissonance. And she had a book called "Mistakes Were Made something like in parentheses, by other people, but not me, or something to that effect.
Okay.
And basically what you went on to talk about is how we're able to identify these things in other people, but never see them in ourselves. And when we are able to recognize them in ourselves, the discomfort is too big. So we have to alleviate that with like rationalizing and things like that. Saying it's okay when I do it, because when I do it, X, Y, Z. But when these people are doing it, it's wrong because whatever, you know? So I do think the ability to identify things in yourself are where everything kind of starts. Because then otherwise you end up being this super judgy person who just judges everybody else, but then doesn't see when they're doing their own stuff, you know?
Yeah, let's not be that guy. We don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. And I think I've been working on that a lot. I think I was super judgy when I was younger, just because I was probably stupider. But asking these questions about everything and just thinking about, really, it's like 5 seconds. It's just asking yourself about anything, about anyone you disagree with or anything you disagree with, just saying, why is that? And then if you think about it for even 5 seconds, you'll automatically have a lot more empathy or sympathy for whatever that is. So for example, there are a lot of people that I used to judge, and this person is shallow, fake, this, that, or the other. And then I'm like, why? If you ask yourself, why are they like that? And then you start thinking, well, I guess if I had lived their experiences, I would be the same way.
Yeah.
Right. And it softens your attitude towards them. I think that's important.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is it all kind of ties into that idea of understanding where things come from and understanding why things are the way they are.
Yeah, and
why people are the way they are.
What a complicated tall order that is.
I remember I don't want to get into this whole issue now, but one time we were talking about guns backstage, right? America.
You and I were?
No. Me and an unspecified person.
Okay.
That we work with, and they were into guns, and America and all this stuff with gun violence, and we're having a somewhat lively debate. And obviously, being Canadian, again, we have an opinion.
We have a
because
different,
of where but because of where we're from.
Yes.
So, right. And that's something I've had to learn to recognize. Like, my opinion isn't the default setting. And when I was arguing my points with this person said, look, you got to understand, I was brought up with guns. When I was 5 or 6, my dad was already taking me up. We were shooting in the woods and all this stuff. It was just a part of life. It's, and my counterpoint to that was, just because something was normal to you in your life doesn't mean it's normal. But the same can be said for me. Just because I have my way of thinking doesn't mean it's the default way and this is the correct way. However, the same could be said for virtually anything. Just because something is normal or something is considered appropriate or whatever at that particular time doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's normal, doesn't mean it doesn't need to be changed. Not the end all be all.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know. I think, again, when you think about these sort of things, it can all be, it's reflected in everything, in ourselves, in the world around us, and again in wrestling, which we keep kind of touching on, but then taking right turns away.
Go way far away from it. Yeah, but it's okay. Yeah. I mean, it's still it's all just very interesting to me, I think, and like my brain is just like opening and kind of exploding as we're talking about all this stuff. As I'm like, wow, my brain has just not gone there.
And so that's the amazing thing. I think there's reasons behind that too. But again, how much do you want to unpack and how much do you have time for? But the culture, I think we're all so wrapped up in I just think we're living so much on the surface day to day that we're hovering on the surface, and there's this insane deep, and it's getting deeper and deeper because it's unaddressed, this deep pool beneath us, and we're just living here with like YouTube videos and cats and Instagram likes and stuff like that, living on the surface the whole time. And there's just so much that's left unaddressed. And even then, I have a whole theory about that. I think that living in a consumerist society that teaches you to care primarily about these things and to consume and spend money on these things rather than think about things that actually matter.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of by design. I think that's a part of the culture that we live in.
Certainly.
I think a lot of that needs to be eradicated. And I think everybody needs to do a little introspection, not just with ourselves, but when you start to look in at yourself, you also start to look out at the culture that shapes you, right? Because that's another huge split in my life, which has been the dynamic between like the individual and the collective. And like, does the individual, like this expression, what is it? You create the universe, but the universe creates you, right? So it's like you create your own world, but you're also, again, a product of the world around you. So you see what I'm saying?
It's so just like, it's a chicken and the egg still, right?
But it's a bit of both. It's understanding the duality and the dynamic. There's a relationship there, you know? And so this is one of the things about wrestling. So I wanted to do a whole thing about this one time. My favorite chant in wrestling, you deserve it. You deserve. I'm like, do you deserve anything? I don't know about that.
Well, I think that's coming, the people that are doing the chant are the fans, and they're the ones that feel that you deserve that. It's not you starting your own chant. And
no, but what about believing that chant? Like, you know what? I worked hard and I do deserve it. No, I don't think so. I think everybody works hard with a few, exceptions. So here's the biggest thing that I think the biggest source of, what's the word I'm looking for? Malcontent. I don't know. The thing that leaves me in a state of unease is how amazing my life is, and the juxtaposition with how awful life is for so many other people, and the sorrow that I feel for other people, and how I have it so good. And it's not because I deserve it. That's the point. I don't deserve it any more than the next person. I don't. And I've come to acknowledge that I believe it's just mainly luck. I think it's mainly luck. Yeah. I worked hard, whatever. Everybody works hard. And you know what? I'm really great at wrestling. I'm really, really good. Like, not everybody is this good. And even that, I don't know, whatever. There's a million ways to why I'm good at it or whatever the hell. But a lot of people work hard at a lot of things and don't get the breaks. And I got breaks. And a lot of those breaks are so far out of our control. Here's one. I saw a tweet yesterday. Elon Musk, billionaire Elon Musk, wrote something about, it's just an old tweet, but it popped up on my timeline or something. Something like, I work 16 hours a day, 24 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and people out here still calling me lucky. Yeah, mother, you're a billionaire. You're lucky. Yeah, you're lucky. Of course you're lucky. You think people just become billionaires and luck has nothing to do with it?
Right.
Like, I'm not discussing. Yeah, you work hard. Everybody works hard, but not everybody's a billionaire. There's luck there. There's variables you're not taking into account. There are people that are working to keep you in that position. You're such a small cog in this tiny thing. You've got an entire network of human beings around you making sure you're a billionaire, but then you pat yourself on the back and go, I did this. I deserve it. That's it. And that's something that, I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about that, but you can take a good guess and say, I think it's BS, man. I think it's BS. I think luck is everything, and luck is the draw. You were born healthy. You were born in Canada. You were born, attractive. These things you had no control over.
Sure.
You could have been born ugly in an impoverished country, and then what? And then your talent would have taken you to where you are now? No, the breaks were on your side. The breaks were on your side. And it's time to acknowledge that. So don't ever chant, you deserve it at me. I don't want to hear it. I would much rather you got lucky. You got lucky. Because that would be
please, I hope that chant takes over. Please, for the love of God, start chanting. You got lucky.
You're super lucky. Yeah, that's a good chant. When I win the WWE championship, that's what I want. You got super lucky. Not the best chant in the world, but you make it work, people. You make it work, because that's the truth. And yeah, hard work, sure, whatever.
They
You know
go
what I'm
hand in
saying?
hand. I mean, it's the, the perfect timing and it meets preparation and all that.
Right.
I mean,
So,
it's
okay,
all the same thing, right?
but the preparation is part of it. Nobody's discounting that.
Yeah.
Because it's a given. Because it's a given. That's why. But it's like this 10%.
But a lot
which
of
is,
people don't do the prep.
who are these people? What are you talking about?
I think they exist.
I don't think so. I think
they exist.
I think far less than you think. That's my opinion. I think everybody's working pretty hard every day just to survive, just to put food on the table. And you're like, yeah, you've got a few people who are like, whatever, I don't care, and barely doing anything. I think that's the minority. I think the majority of people want a good life for themselves, work very hard to try to get things, but just don't get the breaks.
Should I call you out now for not prepping for my podcast?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I am so good at this that I'm able to float by unscathed. But you see what I'm saying? Even then, like, you kind of get what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
I don't want to harp on it too much. My point is just there's, and it's all tied to like this whole thing of like recognizing the collective around you and not putting all this emphasis on your individual efforts, because the slippery slope there, Renee, in my opinion, is when you start talking about that, when you start talking about, look what I did because I worked hard, then people who don't have what you have, you can say, oh, well, look at them. They're not as good as me. Look at them. They're lazy. They're just this, they're that. And you can marginalize them and cast them aside and just say they're just not as good and they're not worth as much. And that's the slippery slope about this hyper individualistic mindset, is you give yourself this like almost godlike, like I am the god of my world and I created all of this.
This was me.
Insanity. And then it's like, oh, you're not god of your world. That's because I'm God. And you're just a peasant. You know what I'm saying? You think I'm exaggerating, but if you really think about how our brains work, that we think in these terms on a certain level, on this I'm not going to be able to pronounce this word, this sort of hierarchical. Oh God, I butchered it.
That's a big one. I know where you're going. We'll phonetic that one.
This mindset of like, I rank here because my worth is here. And the reason you're there, down there, way down there, is because I'm just better than you. That's
messed up. Yeah.
No, but that's true. And you don't want to admit it, but on some level, that's how we see things because we've been rewarded handsomely. It's like, well, I've got my 1 million, 2 million followers or whatever. It's because I'm worth following, because I rule, and like there's so much that you're discounting there along the way. And the people with 20 followers, whatever, or $20, they're just not as good. They're just not as good. So we can dismiss them and we don't even have to care about them. We don't have to, they're just whatever. You did it to yourself.
I mean,
that's my biggest problem with it.
There's so much to unpack there and I would love to continue to unravel it, but I can hear my baby crying and I must go tend to her.
Okay. Let me say one more thing before you do.
Okay.
I'll just tie this one thing to wrestling.
Okay.
Because we haven't done it the whole time I've been trying to. But the individual effort versus the collective effort, right? So you take someone like Roman Reigns, who's a great example. Roman, no one's going to say he's not good. He's awesome, clearly. Of course. Yeah. However, think of how many people it took to get him there.
Sure.
Right? And so that's the amazing thing about wrestling that I think about all the time, is the duality and the dynamic between the individual and the collective, because it's a very individual mindset of like, I got to get over, I'm the best, I have to believe I'm a little bit of that is like, I don't know, WWE conditioning or whatever. Like you got to think like you're the man and you want to be in the top spot. And this, it's all through a lens of sort of dominance, which is a whole other, I won't even touch all that. But my point is just that while we're talking about us, you're relying on the person next to you to get you there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's
like
the machine. You need the machine.
You can be the best. You can be the best promo in the world. Who are you going to cut a promo on if nobody's there to work with you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We need one another to get ahead on an individual level. And, just understanding that dynamic, I think is important. And again, it's one of those things that's reflected in society and in ourselves, but also you see it in the wrestling business when we talk about this guy's the best, that guy's the best, you have to understand the totality of the picture. That's all I'm getting at.
No, I actually think that was a beautiful tie-up. I like that a lot. Well, dude, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Always great to see you. You are always welcome on the show. My first repeat customer. Just always great to see you. And thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Likewise, Renee. A lot of love. And I'm so happy for you and Jon and the baby. And I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you. I'm going to send you lots of pictures. Get ready for that.
Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. Bye.